For over 35 years, Todd Garner has overseen blockbuster films like Con Air, Anger Management, Triple X, 13 Going on 30, and the Mortal Kombat franchise.
Why are they letting you make these movies?
Join Todd as he shares tips and stories from the front lines of producing in Hollywood.
I'm Adam Sandler.
I'm Rebel Wilson.
This is Jeff Probst.
I'm Kaylee Cuoco.
I'm Eli Roth.
This is Marlon Wayans.
Hey, it's Ed Helms.
This is Shay Mitchell.
Hey everybody, this is Kevin James, and this is The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide with Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
What a combination.
Hey, I'm Todd Garner, and welcome to another episode of The Producer's Guide. Today we have legendary producer Stacey Sher, a two-time Academy Award nominee, whose more than 24 films have grossed nearly $2.7 billion worldwide. Her credits read like a who's who of modern cinema. Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, Django Unchained, and The Hateful Eight, Steven Soderbergh's Aaron Brockovich, Out of Sight and Contagion, plus Garden State, Reality Bites, Respect, and Get Shorty. She's also executive produced the Oscar-winning short documentary with her daughter called Period. Let's get into the craft, the deals, and the stories behind the movies with Stacey. Enjoy. All right, I'm here with Stacey Sher. Hello, Stacey.
Hi, Todd.
Well, you are no stranger to this podcast. You've been on before. Going back through my notes and looking at your bio, it's just insane. Your bio is crazy. All of your movies, it's a who's who of unbelievable filmmakers and relationships that you have. If I quintessentially think of a great American producer, it's you. I really mean that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being on today. We have a lot to discuss. But before we do, walk me through just kind of quickly how you got into the business and kind of how you fell in love with producing.
Well, I came up in the time where it was like nobody knew what a producer did or
people still don't.
What I know. It's funny. It changed a little bit, but yes, it's pretty consistent. I just grew up loving movies. It was kind of the common language for my dad and me, and was just kind of like a film geek as a kid. And I really wanted to go into sports. Maybe that would have been a better idea given where we are.
Not too late.
I was working at a station in Washington, D.C. while I was in college, and had an internship, a sports internship. And I was like, wow, this is just, I don't want to be this woman pushing into the locker room. It was super early days. There weren't a lot of people. And so I always joke that I joined the inclusive world of film and television for women, right? But I was going into my senior year at the University of Maryland, and it was a place that I had transferred to because I had friends there. I started college when I was 16, and so my parents wouldn't let me go further away than Miami because I grew up in Fort Lauderdale. And so I was taking an elective, really, and it was kind of divine intervention that this professor, who was a trustee at AFI, where I took an elective, said, you seem to really love movies. There's this new program at USC. It's been around for about 5 or 6 years called the Peter Stark Motion Picture Producing Program. And they only take 25 students a year and not that many right out of college. But I think you should apply. I had to start researching, like, what is a producer? And I had to write an essay. Producers are decision makers. That was really the beginning.
And what was your first job that you consider like your first job in the business?
Well, I worked for a music video and TV director who sadly just passed away this year, Marty Callner, who,
oh, wow.
and so the first thing I worked on as his assistant was a thing called A Toast to Lenny Bruce, which was an HBO special, because Marty started all the stand-up comedy that was on HBO. He did the Live from the Comedy Store with Mitzi. He also started a bunch of sports franchises later for HBO, but I worked on this very early music video for the band Twisted Sister for a song called We're Not Gonna Take It. And working for Marty, I learned very quickly that like no is not an option. And so I found Niedermeyer from Animal House, Mark Metcalf, who played Niedermeyer at Animal House. He was doing off-Broadway theater, and I talked him into flying People's Express Airlines to come, reprise his famous speech from Animal House in that music video. Sorry, there was somebody driving like a hot rod out the window on Ventura
It's very
Boulevard.
Hollywood, very Hollywood. So you produced. You got somebody to actually travel to. It was a huge moment in that video, and that video was a defining moment in the culture of quote unquote ruining America's youth, and you were kind of at the epicenter of it. And weirdly, that kind of rock and roll, counterculture, leading edge has really defined your career in terms of the movies you've made, the people you've worked with. When you started Jersey Films with Danny DeVito and Michael Shamberg, was that your North Star? Have you always wanted to kind of be on the leading edge of culture and make things that were kind of undefinable?
It's funny. One of my other first bosses just passed away this year too, Linda Obst. And I in between, like my first job was while I was in grad school, and I talked Art Murphy into letting me stay because I had to work all through school. And actually, Neil Moritz was in my class at Stark, your friend, our mutual
Yes.
acquaintance. My second year, I worked for a man who is the president of TriStar, and while I was there, an executive who said, when you get out of school, when you're looking for your real job, let me know and I'll make calls for you. And that was Alan Stewart. And so I'm always like, if people ask me for help and they've, been great interns or have worked for me, I'm always there to help because I was the beneficiary of that. So she really came through and got me an interview with the great Deborah Hill and Linda. And they hired me on a trial basis, and somebody that I met during my internship Twisted Sister time was a writer named David Simpkins, who wrote the screenplay of Adventures in Babysitting, and he had wanted to do something with Twisted Sister that didn't come to be. He was a below the line budget executive at New World, which at the time owned Marvel and made movies like Children of the Corn and Angel, and that didn't work out, but we stayed friends. And he told me that he had this idea to do this movie, After Hours for Kids. And the Scorsese, that was his original touchstone for it. And he gave it to me before he gave it to his agent. I gave it to Deborah and Linda while I was on my trial basis because it was a great script. It became the first movie that company made together. And I got to keep my job.
That's great.
So it was, Linda worked at the New York Times Magazine, and she had edited this book that was a history of the 60s. And I just loved all pop culture. There were things that I definitely pushed more edgier probably than the two of them at times. Like I remember her making fun of me for wanting to buy the script for Heathers, because she just didn't get it. And of course, now Heathers the musical is opening many, many years later. But she instilled this thing in me that I think I've carried through. And I had to do, and my daughter's interning at A24 now. And when I tell her that I used to read and cover 30 scripts a weekend, she accuses me of lying. But I just had no life, I just would, Friday night, I'd start reading and read. I'd go out for a couple of hours and then just keep reading for the whole weekend. But in my short coverage, she would always say, what's the best version of the movie? And so it trained your mind to say who the cast was, who the director was, what kind of movie was it like in its best form, even if it was terrible. So that was one pillar of my training. The other pillar of my training from a development standpoint, and then I'll get to Deborah, and then I'll get to Jersey, sorry.
No worries.
But they're really foundational for me, these two women. And Deborah was, the godmother of independent cinema with John Carpenter. And only now, as Jamie Lee Curtis has talked about her contribution to the screenplay of Halloween, are people really understanding that she wasn't just the girlfriend producer, who could do every job on the set, because she had started as a script supervisor on the Streets of San Francisco TV show. But back to Linda, she also had a real rigor for having me read great scripts. She was like, your whole job can't just be reading things that are terrible, because that could be, you have to develop your taste and your voice. And I understood it from the films that I liked. That became a part of it. And then very quickly, I became a part of a group of writer friends. Scott Frank was one of my first friends on the Paramount lot. that's when I met David Fincher and Shane Black and all of the people that were known as, and Ed Solomon, the people known as the Pato guys at that time, because they were a bunch of UCLA students that lived in a house together. I do believe kind of one of the best things for people who are younger and starting out is getting to know your class, your group, because you will all rise together. And I think we really are seeing that now, with Ryan Coogler and Sev and, all of those kinds of things. So Jersey, Michael and Danny started Jersey together. I became their partner after bringing in that movie, Pulp Fiction, and it working. But Danny's a great lover of cinema. And Michael also comes from an experimental background. He started a company called TV, making documentaries. Really, they just gave me the freedom and backed me. And the way that we approached things were, if any one of us was passionate about it, we backed the others. And then the same was true of Pam Abdi and even Dan Levine, who worked for us, was really passionate about John Hamburg, which was how we ended up making Along Came Polly. So that was really a core element. And two things were really important to that company. Danny was a Final Cut producer. And so we were able to offer a level of protection to the people who made their directorial debuts with us. And then we had a development fund. And so we paid for the development of Pulp Fiction. We paid for the development of Aaron Brockovich. We paid for the development of How High. We paid for the development of the World Trade Center movie, Garden State, Camp. All of those things were things that we took bets on. Freedom Writers, all of them were things that were passed on by everybody. So that was the flexibility for us, and I think that's a good segue into talking about what we've lost in kind of old school producers, because the other part of it is what I learned from Deborah, which is there's no above or below the line. Mm-hmm. We're all one crew trying to make our day and make the best version of the movie and be fiscally responsible, but responsible to the vision of the director and the script.
You and I have spoke a lot about the degradation of the producing job in general, and certainly the credit and also just people's understanding of what we do. And I want to talk to you about that. But you said two things that was really striking to me. One was the word passion. And two was, what's the best version of the movie? I feel like that's been lost. Both of those things have kind of been lost at the buyer level. I don't see a tremendous amount of passion at the buyer level. And I certainly don't see executives feeling like, what's the best version of this movie? What potential does this movie have? And what's amazing to me is you talk about all those people you met and the Pata guys and things like that. And the young people that were coming up are now the legends of this business. Young executives, I don't think, realize how much power they have.
Yeah, because they're connected to what the movie-going fan base that we should be building are interested in.
Yeah, I mean, they have so much power in that they are the closest thing to what every studio, every advertiser, every television network is after. And I feel that there's just this level of certainly fear. I don't know that there's anyone in the higher ranks rewarding passion and asking them, when you read a script, think about what's the best version of the movie. Because the business of current really high level decision makers are so risk averse, I almost feel like they're sort of implicitly or sort of more opaquely saying, don't have passion. Passion will get you in trouble. Like if you can be dispassionate and really look at this like a business, and they're just widgets, and look at it that way, you're going to be better off.
Yeah, but people have been trying to de-risk our business for longer than we've both been in the business. And if there was some machine that could predict what would be a hit, every movie would be a hit, and nothing would, the biggest hits that I've ever had in my career were things that nobody got.
And I want young executives and young agents and young managers to really hear me that they have so much power. They're so close to what just what do you want to watch? You're living in the world. Use that power and really use your voice. And if you can read a script and listen to Stacey Sher, who's a fucking legend, and think, what could be the best version of this movie? Am I passionate about this genre? Am I passionate about this story? And you can push that through, you can change the world. I mean, Pulp Fiction and the movies you're talking about when you were a young person and you changed the fucking world. And I don't know that they're thinking that way. I think they're thinking of they want to make a hit and they want to help the stock price on a quarterly basis because that's what their bosses are telling them. I just wish that they would change their thinking and really think, God damn, I could really change the world.
But look, I think part of it isn't their problem, isn't their fault, because
I think
in the 2000s, we fell into this bifurcated way of thinking about cinema. It was, popular films and artistic films. And I think that really came out of, trying to game the Academy Awards system and the way in which Miramax and Weinstein Company tried to look at everybody like voting blocks for nominations and for wins. And then people wanted to win awards so that they'd like go into things that were built for awards. But, the last time there were 5 nominations, I was fortunate to be one of them. And it was for Aaron Brockovich. Every movie but one grossed over $100 million. And that was in 2000. Crouching Tiger did, Gladiator, which one did, we did, even Traffic did. It was only Chocolat, which was the beginning of this thing of like, screeners being sent. It was a very different approach. And then it moved to 10, I think, really in order to get certain like blockbusters nominated. And those kinds of genre films were not going to be nominated until they had the artistic merit for them to be like Joker was, and to really be off center. Encouraging filmmakers to want to make movies for larger audiences, encouraging personal filmmakers to have a bigger vision. And back to Jersey, one of the things, and I feel like I always pick on this filmmaker who I'm an enormous fan of when I use this example, but do you remember Hal Hartley? He was a big 90s filmmaker. We always used to say we weren't going to make Hal Hartley films at Jersey because Hal Hartley wasn't interested in reaching the biggest possible audience. And I always felt that it was really punk rock to use a popular art form to say something. So if you have the biggest movie star in the world at that time, Julia Roberts, was Steven Soderbergh, who said, I'm going to shoot Aaron Brockovich, which is now 25 years old, to look like a Ken Loach film. But I'm going to tell this story that shines a light in a really entertaining way on toxic pollution. That's punk rock. Because you're reaching a large amount of people to say, look what's going on in the world. And genre is really helpful in doing that. And what are the traditions of structural storytelling that can help you reach a large audience?
And all of those people that you've aligned yourself with in that punk rock journey are now legends. I mean, they became legends quickly, and they're big time talents that I guess maybe on the surface, especially now, people might think they don't need producers. They could do it without you. They could do it without producers. They're so talented. When you're working with that level of talent in terms of a director or writer-director, what do they need you for? What do you bring to the table as a producer? Because I think the B side of that question is a lot of people don't know what producers do. And a lot of people on both sides of the aisle, in terms of buyers and in terms of just lay people, think, do we need producers anymore? What do we need them for? We have creative executives. We've got writers that can write and directors that can direct and actors that can act. And what do we really need producers for? But you've worked with so many hugely talented people. What do you bring to the table when you're producing for them?
I think you try to bring out the best version of them. You remind, it was funny. I was very fortunate early in my career to work with Terry Gilliam. And there was one day on the set of The Fisher King, which was like my second associate producer credit. Richard LaGravenese, who I've worked with a lot and I'm very close with, said, to Terry, they were struggling with some blocking on something, and he went over and whispered to him and said, like, the script says here that they do it. And Terry was really funny. And he said, wait a moment, the screenwriter has something to add. He wants us to read the script. And he said, thank you for catching that, because at a certain point you're moving like the corporation of the movie forward, and somebody has to hold all of the pieces in their head. And you stop reading it, you stop remembering why you wanted to make something. So it's being there to be a long distance runner when other people are sprinting, to remember that it's a marathon to get the movie made. The job is not just to develop it well, package it well, get it made well. It's to sell it well and to protect it along every step. And sometimes you're protecting the director from themselves. One of the great lessons I ever had was from the late and brilliant Oscar-winning editor Ann V. Coates, who cut Out of Sight. And there's a scene that with Jennifer Lopez and George Clooney that after they slept together, where they had a conversation about, her thinking that he was dumb. We famously dubbed it the post-coital scene, so original. But our studio head kept saying, you don't need that. It doesn't move the plot forward. And, the movie wasn't testing any better. And at one point, Steven said, okay, let's cut it. And I was so programmed to follow the director at that point. And I remember Ann Coates called me and she said, I refuse to cut negative, because we were still projecting only on film then. And I refuse to cut negative unless you take one more shot at him. And I happened to have been with Richard LaGravenese, who also did all the crucial rewrites and really deserved credit for Aaron Brockovich as well. He had written The Horse Whisperer, and we were going to the premiere of it. I was on the phone with Steven starting to convince him, and he said, put him on speakerphone. And he was like, that scene is what makes it a Steven Soderbergh scene. And we came a Steven Soderbergh movie, and we came so close to losing it. And that's when I realized, and I always felt that way, but I thought, well, if Steven's ready to cut it. And that's when I realized they get worn down by the process too. So my job is never to be. And that's what Anne taught me.
And if you were a huge piece of talent, why would you think they would need a producer?
It's so funny. I was talking about I feel like I'm talking about a lot of people who are not here any longer today, but they're like, have been my guardian angels, and the late Polly Platt, and the late brilliant Polly Platt was one of them. And I was telling somebody yesterday in my last conversation with her before she passed away, she'd just come back from a beautiful day out with Bill Hurt, and she had done broadcast news. And the last thing she said to me is, treat actors well, Stacey. They always remember. And of course, again, you work with a lot of people who don't get respected. So part of it is wanting to have their voice heard and know that they're safe in a space to create. I worked with someone recently who wasn't feeling well one day, and I insisted that they leave. And they said it's the first day anyone had ever sent them home on set. And it was kind of a serious situation. So we're the only people, if we're doing our job properly, that are stakeholders to the movie. So in only being responsible to making that great, you can serve everybody, because taking care of all of the different people is serving the film. Sometimes it means reminding the director what they wanted to do. Sometimes it means taking the script away from the writer before they overwrite or destroy. Sometimes it means protecting the actor from a situation that's making them feel, I don't mean unsafe, but not comfortable enough to open up and give their best. So I think that's sort of why everybody needs us, because we're kind of a neutral party aligned with making the greatest piece of art we can.
And you have made so many incredible movies and television shows and have such an incredible deep bench of relationships. I would assume that you must be treated very well by everybody, and that it must be
Todd, that's not true.
Well, I'm setting you up. I'm setting you up for the answer. I know the answer. I would just assume. And that people would really lean on you as a producer to guide them through. Is that the case in this business today?
As you know, there was a decision, and look, in fairness to the studios, there are a lot of people that don't do the job. There are not a lot of people that show up, roll up their sleeves, are there in the visual effects review, are there in the sound mix, are there when a score doesn't work, or when are there when it's late at night and you're having a weather problem and it hasn't snowed and you need to get snow. There are people that phone it in. So it has given, now that is also because the credit has been given away like candy because we don't have a union to say who gets it and who doesn't. It sometimes is a way to pay somebody more money that isn't subject to fringes. It's sometimes a way to pay somebody else that would be paying getting paid a commission money, because there are actors who are great producers and do the job. There are directors who are great producers that do the job. And there are managers that are great producers and do the job. And there are producers that don't show up. So all of those things are true. But at a certain point, somebody decided these deals were a waste of money. And that made it hard for companies like ours to pay our team and to train the next generation to do the job the way that we do the job. If I didn't have Deborah and Linda and Michael and the executives I was fortunate enough to learn from, like Lindsay Duran, or Laura Ziskin or Polly, or people who were mentors, I couldn't do the job the way I do the job. And in fact, the reason Ray Stark endowed USC and started the Peter Stark program was because he saw that producers like him were disappearing, people who knew how to acquire movies, package them, and make them. It was going away. So we've talked a lot about the fact that if you're lucky enough to have been guaranteed what we now call commencement wages, but were called development fees, they have not changed since 1972, the $25,000, which isn't $25,000. It's half of $12,500. So you could work for decades on something and have gotten paid maybe $12,500 the first 6 months that you were working on it.
Right.
Or you could be so lucky as to be put on a TV project and the writers are getting paid and the studio executives are getting paid and the agents are making their commission and you're expected to deliver the movie to the show and you don't get paid. And if it doesn't get made, if you make a deal with the studio and not a network, or in any case, if it doesn't get made or doesn't sell, you've put in the same amount of time as everybody else and you have made nothing.
Yeah. There's a weird thing with packaging. When I was doing the job as an executive, packaging was the thing, but then you're beholden to the package. So you have to love the package. For me, it was always an odd one because it sort of felt, unless you had the obvious package, that you were limiting yourself in terms of who your buyers were and who your audience was. And is one of the things I loved most about being an executive was being a part of that packaging and being a part of that team that got to put the movie together. And again, it goes back to passion and it goes back to the idea of what's the best version of this movie. And I would always lean on really good producers. And yes, I have worked with a lot of producers that are not good, that just phone it in, that are, too rich to really care, or not enough experience to know what they're doing, or don't know how to do the job, or beholden to one particular piece of talent, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been in that other seat as well. But when you're working with a really good producer like yourself or Jerry Bruckheimer or Adam Sandler, to use an exactor, that's a great producer. These are producers I've worked with. And you really can lock arms with them in a real way. It's so fun. And it gives you so much power and it gives you so much ability to shape what the thing can be, to help figure out what your audience will want. And I feel, again, like it's been too much of, well, what's the package? Is it undeniable? And a lot of playing defense as opposed to playing offense. And the problem when you're playing defense and you're just having things brought to you, then you're really beholden to the actor, because really else, what else is there, right? There's a great idea, there's a great script, and it's cast well, all right? And that it then is executed at the highest level. Those are really the biggest things you have control over. So if you have a package that's already being brought to you with a director and an actor, like, yeah, you can maybe make this. I'm assuming the script is great because the actor and director have already committed to it. So you're playing defense. You're bringing it to you, and you're saying, oh, yes or no, based on that. But like the joy, and like what you said, of seeing what's the best version of the movie and finding your passion for it, is digging in a piece of material that has a great idea, a great concept, and finding that great story to put all those things together. Because then you can also make a brand for yourself. And I feel like, sadly, as consolidation continues to happen, and as studios continue to look for ways to cut costs, there's more and more executives losing their job. And best case, if you lose your job and if you have a brand of, you're known for being, knowing Stacey Sher and liking those kind of movies and being punk rock, and you have those relationships, you'll land on your feet. If you're an executive that's just been playing defense for 10 years, it's hard for you to go out and find another job and be able to point to anything that you really did. And so selfishly, I wish the younger executives, the younger buyers would be like wanting to dig in and have really figure it out and make a name for themselves and do things that are outside of the box, and convincing their bosses, like Pam Abdi did with you with Garden State, like just to be able to find those things that they're, and Pam still talks about Garden State, and she's the chairman of Warner Brothers because it's just it's a fond memory for her of something where she was younger and got something done. That's exciting. I'll point to Con Air to the day I pass away, probably, or Anger Management, things that I really felt like I really had a hand in getting done. I'll always talk about that because it's just such a great memory in my 20s of having accomplished those things.
That's how I feel about Fisher King, and still feel about Adventures in Babysitting. It makes me happy, when people are still finding it on Disney, because it grows out of that passion, and you can't lose that. If you lose that, you might as well go work at a Fortune 500 corporation, because they're better businesses than ours are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But look, I also had a really early lesson in what I would call situational power. Because aside from that brief stint at Activision, which was more about staying home with my kids because of runaway production, when I was working for Gary Hendler, he was the president of TriStar Pictures while I was in grad school, and he resigned or was pushed out, and I was his second assistant, and his first assistant was a Harvard lawyer named Linwood Spinks, very nice man. His phone sheet went from 1,500 calls a day to 5. Now, one of them was the most powerful person in Hollywood at the time, Mike Ovitz, because he had given him all of his clients when he left being a lawyer. But the power was the power of the chair. So if you have a brand and you have relationships and you have a skill set, that's personal power versus situational power. And that's what, in these young executives, you're talking about. Because if an agent says to whoever's looking for somebody, right? Because as things rotate, oh, I loved so-and-so, they always protected my client. That matters. Your reputation matters. How you treat people matters. Don't be an asshole. Tell the truth. We used to have a joke that there was one executive that we worked with that said, I'll take care of it, was something that they would actually do. And let me get into it meant I don't actually have the power to do this, but I'm going to see, you just want somebody to say, I can't make that happen for you. I have to talk to my bosses. I think you need it. I'm on your side. We just want to know where we stand. The more direct people can be in this very opaque world we live in that is blanketed with fear because of change, the more we need directness and kindness.
And if you really want to move up in the executive ranks, if you think about the people that are running these studios right now, you can point to things they contributed, things they bought, that things they did that weren't just brand management, that they had passion for pretty much around the horn. You can see, Donna was known for these purchases and these buys. And the list is too long to mention, or Mike and Pam, or, the Skydance folks right now, or even Adam Fogelson at Lionsgate. He did that job for years, and you can point to movies that he ran through and was passionate about, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to take those shots. It's important for us as producers too, because we're not all fortunate to have IP, and we all we have really are our ideas and our relationships. So we're trying to bring things that are going to be original and going to be different. And for somebody who has made the movie, like the movies you made, those are fucking great bets. And I wish that executives and buyers and people leaned on producers more, because we have the ability to put these things together. And since most of us don't have deals, we're really motivated to get them made. And so, whereas a really high-level actor or high-level director, they have opportunities elsewhere. They can go take jobs. They can take acting assignments. They can take directing assignments. Producers are grinding. We have to get stuff. We have to be entrepreneurial and get things made. I wish that more writers and executives and agents and managers leaned on us more, because we're very motivated to keep these things going and put them together. I feel like it's the business as a whole, driven by Wall Street, is such a quarterly business. And I feel like that trickle down has really gotten everybody to be very short-sighted. What's the quickest way I can get a movie made? Well, the quickest way is to get a big actor. Okay, I'm going to get a big actor. Okay, I went down the list of the 7 big actors. I didn't get it. Next, on to the next. As opposed to, again, I just go back to, it's such a great sentence, is what is the best version of this movie? Because that's the thing that's going to last.
Shamberg always used to say this thing, which was, if you aim high and miss, you could still hold your head up high.
Right.
What becomes IP changes all the time, right? Like, what is the hot IP at any given time? But if you look at genre, and I don't mean just horror, I mean, if you look at romantic comedy, if you look at action, if you look at anything as a form to hold ideas, like the marvel of Sinners is that it's a commercial horror movie that is saying something. And that's why it resonates with people. In One Battle After Another, it's a crowd-pleasing film about a man looking for his daughter and not giving up. And even in a world where his optimism and his idealism has been beaten out of him, the one thing he can believe in is loving his child. And those big ideas connect with people, because movies are modern myths that help us understand the times we live in. And and it doesn't matter if it's a stoner comedy like How High, which, is about magical weed to get high test scores. It's also about 2 people believing that they were good enough all along to be at a school on their own, and that they deserve to be there. So again, you can take these things and infuse them with stuff without being preachy. And those are when you think about a movie like Jerry Maguire, which, really continues to resonate and work as this beautiful exploration of conscience and love and commitment. And then something like Materialists also, like, these are all in a lineage to things like that Billy Wilder was exploring. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we do have classic form. The key is young people telling the stories that they need to tell on a bigger canvas. I
want to talk about Pulp Fiction for a second, because that to me is kind of the Excalibur of young people, like young executives, just the mythic nature of that. Just like, you all you young punk rockers make this movie that just it's also like PTA and DeLuca with Boogie Nights. Like it's just this kind of mythical creature.
I actually sent Mike the script for Boogie Nights because I had met Paul in he was trying to get Sydney financed Hard Eight, what became Hard Eight, while we were in Cannes for Pulp Fiction.
Amazing.
So that's when Paul was at the Sundance Lab with my friends Scott Frank and Richard LaGravenese as his mentors, and so they had introduced us.
Well, let's talk about Pulp Fiction just for a few minutes. Walk me through you're a young person in their 20s, and Quentin is also in his 20s, and Lawrence Bender is also in his 20s. Walk me through how that movie got made, because I just want to remind people it's never been easy, because I think there's also this myth that, that was young people, that was the 70s. Yeah. Like people think it was just like this easy time.
Yeah, the 90s were not easy for weirdos like me. I got yelled at for not making romantic comedies and all the time.
And everybody says, "Oh, this is new." You know, I don't mean everybody. I mean, there is this between the media and this feeling and the conversations that I hear mostly. It's like it's never been this bad. It's always this.
I've been hearing that since I started working in the late 80s. Oh, you missed it. You missed the good times.
Walk me through getting Pulp Fiction made. I hope it's inspiring. What I'm praying is that I just looked at the Hollywood Reporter, you know, the executives, the hot
35
executives.
under 35. Yeah,
which
me
I
too.
was one in the 100 years ago. And I just want anybody who's looking at that going, "Oh, I wish I was on that list," or anybody who's on that list, or anybody who was on that list and still is in the system and is in a position to buy. I want you to wrap your arms around us as a community. I don't mean you and me, but I mean the whole community, because I think together, if we could all be a little more punk rock, I think we could do really cool shit. And so just walk me through real quick how you got Pulp Fiction made.
Okay, so I used to do this thing starting when I worked for Deborah and Linda, which was I would scour Variety and the Hollywood Reporter. There were these columns called Future Films in the U.S. Do you remember those? That were really for below the line execs.
Yep.
And if there was a really great looking cast with a writer or director I didn't know, I would get the script and read it. Reservoir Dogs was in there that way. Lee Stolman was already an agent at William Morris at the time, because he corrected me when I told this story once recently to somebody. But Matt Dillon was going to do Reservoir Dogs at one point, and that's how they ended up representing Quentin, because it came through a lot of the really great new filmmakers come through the indie division because they'll see the best new scripts. Of course, now we have things like The Blacklist. It's totally different. But that was my source, and I had been trying to meet Quentin because I loved the script of Reservoir Dogs. They hadn't started shooting yet. I was at the premiere of Terminator 2 with my friend Chris Brancato, who's now a very big showrunner, but at the time he was Lawrence Bender's roommate, and he was not that far out of college, and all of us weren't. My friend Callie Corey was there, who wrote Thelma and Louise, which had just finished shooting. So it was Chris, Callie, me, and Harvey Keitel. And this guy starts walking up. Now, Chris knew because Lawrence was producing Reservoir Dogs, which hadn't started yet, and Lawrence was his roommate. And Lawrence had been an actor and a dancer and had asked Quentin to give him a few months. And his friend, who was an acting coach, was friends with Harvey. And that's how, and there was a company called Live Entertainment, which was famously, people would know them most because the Menendez story was just on Netflix, but it was on Sunset. And they were a home video company. So if you had Harvey Keitel, you could get $1.5 million. If you had Chris Walken, you could get $3 million. So they got Harvey. And this guy is walking up, and Chris turns to me and says, "I'm going to make your night, meet Quentin Tarantino." So we became very fast friends, and they started shooting Reservoir Dogs.
I just want to stop you for one second, because I think there's an important point to make here. Two important points quickly, and then I'm sorry to interrupt you. The first is anybody could have done what you did. Read the Variety, figured that out, read the script. Anyone. It wasn't like you had some magic dust. You figured out a little plan. There's a million ways for young producers now, between the Blacklist and everything's on the internet now. You can find scripts that
And who's
you
winning,
connect-
what shorts are hot,
and it connected
what...
with you. And I'm sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, when Quentin walked up, you launched into, I read your script, and he knew you really read it and that you were passionate
That's
about
right.
that. And that's what made you guys become friends. You had
Yeah.
done the work, and you had a point of view, and you fell in love with a piece of writing.
Yeah, and look, we offered him something. He didn't want to adapt anything. He said, I'll only do that if my first film doesn't work out. I'll do other people's work. And so we made an offer to make a blind deal, and the pitch was this: 3 movies that are one movie. It's called Pulp Fiction. That was the pitch. And we said, fine. And so and he had an office at Jersey Films, and Lawrence had an office at Jersey Films, and John Glickman was an intern for Lawrence Bender while they were making Fresh in the Jersey Films office. Helen Childress and Ben Stiller were at one point, because we were also developing Reality Bites, and Quentin finished the script, and Danny loves to say we got the script. It was 162 pages, and it said Pulp Fiction final draft. And
now had Reservoir Dogs even come out yet?
Yeah, Reservoir Dogs came out. Quentin had started the script, then he finished the script in Europe, or he was still working on the script. He was finishing the 3rd act, actually. He was finishing the 3rd act after Dogs had come out in the office, because I just remember him I was in Helen's office working on Reality Bites, and he said, I've just written something where something unspeakable happens. And while he was in Amsterdam, he was like reading me scenes from a phone booth across from where his apartment was. Jack Rapke had suggested a really smart deal structure. He was still an agent at CAA. And the deal that we made with TriStar that I've replicated many times was, instead of selling it, we made a deal which was reversion with a lien, which means that when the script was finished with a cast list and a budget, the studio had 30 days to proceed to production, as long as we got one of the actors in those categories and at that budget. Or it reverted to us, not went into turnaround, but reverted to us with a lien just for the actual hard costs.
So at that point at TriStar, had you shopped the script to a bunch of different people, or you?
No. Our deal was there, so we had to go there first.
Who was the executive you gave it to? Do you remember?
Well, it was Mike Medavoy who passed on it famously.
Okay.
And look, Kevin Misher loved it. I feel like Amy Bear was an executive there then too.
So the younger people loved it, and the guy who was running it was like, I don't know, this seems very
in
complicated.
fairness to him, he knew that it was great, but he had been away with a bunch of congresspeople who had been criticizing violence in Hollywood, which is always, and now, of course, he was sitting in front of a gigantic cliffhanger poster, which had just come out, and it said like $150 million in the first 20 days or something, which is a super violent movie, telling us that the movie was too violent. And it was an $8.5 million budget. We submitted it to everyone. We were next going to be dealing with Sammy Hadida and like foreign sales and all of that. And Mike Simpson was on point at this point with it.
But I think this is important. This is important to stop for Willie Wood. And look, I love Mike, and I've had Mike on this podcast. There's no denying he's one of the best executives that's ever done it. I mean, his list of movies is incredible. However, I can see sitting in front of a cliffhanger poster, I could do this. This is a smart bet. This is a movie that has a big movie star that is resonating with everybody in the world, and I'm making a ton of profit, right? That's a good thing to focus on. It is no different than the superhero genre or the game genre or, the IP play that everybody wants to make. It's not about age or anything. It's about it's very easy to fall into that trap. I love Cliffhanger, by the way.
So do I.
They remade it, but it's not Pulp Fiction. And again, this just goes to my point of like, when you're a young person in this business, whether you're a producer or wannabe producer or an executive, those big pieces of IP are never going to be credited to you, right? Those are going to be credited to the corporation, to the big movie star, not to the person that founded and put it together. But it's big movie stars in Pulp Fiction. It's funny because Pulp Fiction is always, in my history of knowing about this movie, you, Quentin, Lawrence, right? It's not the distributor. It's not even Bruce and it's not Travolta. It's you three. And it's like, that is really impactful because you were, and again, Boogie Nights, Wahlberg is fantastic in the movie. It's always I'm talking about from the business side.
No, it's
always
Paul
looked
and
at
Mike.
as Mike.
It's Paul and Mike.
Right. And so this is an opportunity for young people to really kind of, and again, right there, you got passed on sitting in front of
But by the way, Mike really wanted to make Pulp Fiction. And I will say, Bob Shea really loved. It's so funny to like this day. If I see Bob Shea, he's like my greatest regret in my career is like not ignoring the people who gave me estimates and saying it was a bad bet. Yeah. You know, because Mike was jumping on the desk saying we need to make this.
Mike DeLuca.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying in terms of you sitting there with your script and Quentin Tarantino and looking at a person sitting in front of a cliffhanger poster is no different than somebody trying to be passionate about a movie and someone sitting in front of a Marvel poster or whatever, you know, huge piece of IP that makes $1 billion. It's my point is it's exactly the same. And you had passion for it and you kept going. So after TriStar passes, now what happens?
Basically, I feel like Mike Simpson convinced Harvey Weinstein he was in a bidding war, but he was in a bidding war with himself. And
What?
so,
That's amazing.
And because of Jersey, Quentin had final cut, which was big protection. And we shot for 60 days in Los Angeles at an $8.5 million budget. You know, it was a triumph of marketing also because we knew that people needed to be prepared for what they were going to see. And I think it's sort of the way that people are going back over and over again to see One Battle After Another, or, you know, certain A24 movies or neon movies now, or, you know, things that have a cultural relevance for younger people. And again, that's the key, you know, while I will continue to be able to support a filmmaker, make them the best version of themselves, make the best version of a movie, and block and tackle and see all the angles. I'm not necessarily going to find the person who's Quentin Tarantino today.
Yeah.
But if you bring him to me, because you're, you know, 25 years old or 26 when I was when I met Quentin, I'll recognize it like Michael and Danny did, who are 20 years older than me.
Yeah, I wonder a lot. And Pulp Fiction is kind of the perfect example of that. As I wonder a lot, because I could not even tell you a single other movie released during that year that was aimed at me. Because I was in my 20s, aimed at me when I was the prime movie going audience. I remember Pulp Fiction, and I wonder a lot about is it the chicken or the egg? Are young people not going because they're just not interested in movies, which I don't believe, or is it that we as a business assume because when you make a movie for everybody, you cast a huge net and you get pieces of all of the different audiences. If that particular audience is like, you're not making anything for me. You're not making Pulp Fiction. Yeah. You're not making Boogie Nights. You're not making Animal House. You're not making Fast Times at Ridgemont High School. You're not making these movies that are, or any of the John Hughes stuff that just speaks to me so directly. For some reason, yeah, I was going to say, for some reason, K-pop Demon Hunters seem to do it, but that seems like okay, but there's got to be other things that.
Well, I'm just going to jump in because it's very fresh in my mind to do a plug for my friend and current person I'm working with, Cameron Crowe, and his phenomenal new book, because I'm both reading and listening to it. So in between not being able to read it, if I'm driving somewhere, I'll listen to it as well. And I just listened to the Fast Times chapter, and actually John Hughes was on the lot at the same time as they were finishing Fast Times, and he tells the story of these disastrous marketing screenings where, you know, everyone, the movie tested horribly, but it was like they had recruited adults and they'd cut way back in their distribution. And Cameron and a friend were on a way to somebody's wedding, and they were in Arizona and decided to check in the multiplex, and it was sold out, and it was all kids, and because it was a movie for them. But we weren't set up as a business to understand. And then at a certain point, we decided that those kinds of movies only should live, you know, after John Hughes, there started to be a lot of like teen stuff on television. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it doesn't also have a place in the theater just because Netflix services that audience in streaming. It doesn't mean, just because Idea of You is a giant hit for Amazon as a streaming movie, it doesn't mean that a big rom-com couldn't come out, like the Sydney Sweeney Glenn Powell movie couldn't come out and do over $100 million. We need to deliver a new generation of stars and figure out who's speaking to them, or we're going to lose attention to devices and short form and not be relevant and not be at the cultural epicenter. In the same way that I remember once reading somebody talking about when your record comes out now, you're not competing with the other releases that come out that week. You're competing with the history of recorded music. Mm-hmm. So if someone's deciding whether they're going to listen to your record or they're going to listen to David Bowie or Fleetwood Mac or Jay-Z or Beyonce, for a brand new band. Mm-hmm. Or REM, I don't know. Or Frank Sinatra. I mean, you go on and on and on. It's the entire history of it. So a sameness or a poppiness comes out, but we don't nurture people to develop what they need to say. And I think we're starting to see a re-entrenchment to passion in Gen Z and younger. They just seem to care.
Well, I also hear a lot. It's an easy pass, and it's just things that people say just to get out of it. This feels like a streamer, and it's like, okay, what doesn't? I mean, honestly, every genre, every budget, every star has done streaming. So the fact that again, it goes back to, you're not thinking of what's the best version of this movie. You're thinking of what is the worst version.
I think it feels like a streamer means it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to market. It's expensive to market. I mean, look, we weren't getting Erin Brockovich made without Julia Roberts, who is the biggest movie star in the world. And we proudly paid her as much as any of her male colleagues were getting paid at that time. She was the first woman to hit $20 million with that movie. And the movie still cost under $50. Mm-hmm. Because Steven Soderbergh is the most efficiently talented, brilliant person I've ever worked with. So, but you still need to make people want to go to the cinema. It has to feel like a water cooler moment. Mm-hmm. And you can't get lazy and say, oh, people only want to see horror now. That's lazy. That's what feels safe and easy. This has never been, since the Paramount consent decrees, when studios didn't own theaters anymore, this has never been a sure thing as a business. We didn't control the supply chain and all revenue. Now, one could argue that Netflix does. They're a fully vertically integrated company. Yeah. They control their distribution and their production, but the legacy studios do not. Now, Sony is experimenting because they own Alamo Drafthouse. And it's funny, my 22-year-old daughter was going on and on and on about having gone there to go see the new Yorgos movie and what a great time she and her friends had. Yeah. So we have to work harder to make cinema matter to younger people, or we're a dying business. We're a 20th century business.
Yeah. And the way to do that is for the younger generation to be passionate about stuff, to want to make their mark like you did with Pulp Fiction, and to figure out what the best version of that movie they're passionate about is and get it up there, get it on the screen. And that speaks to their generation.
It's also in choosing. When we all met Quentin, we knew he wanted to reach the largest audience possible. Mm-hmm. Not every filmmaker does. Right. And at a certain point, they decide they want to. I mean, the best filmmakers I've worked with are very conscious of wanting to connect with an audience. That mattered to Oliver Stone. That mattered to Milos Forman when I was lucky enough to work with both of them. That matters to Soderbergh. That matters to Quentin. I mean, the reason that Soderbergh decided to do Candelabra on HBO, and it was released theatrically in Europe, was because he didn't want to lose money for his home studio. Mm-hmm. And so that's it. It's also picking people who have the same goals. There's what's the best version of a movie, and it could be a tiny little jewel. But there's also what's the best version of the movie to reach the largest audience possible. As
a producer working in the business so intimately, what is your advice for the business to move it through this time to be healthy and prosperous again?
I mean, it's always to be a little fearless, you know? It's like the chairs are rented, take big swings. You can do everything right, and the chair's still rented. As we see in times of contraction now, where people who are really talented are losing their jobs, you know? So I think make what you're passionate about. You know, it's funny, when I was working at Activision, Blizzard, one of the co-creators of the game Overwatch was a reader at Universal when the Pulp Fiction script came in, and he was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. We have to make it, in his coverage. And when they just out of hand rejected it, he was like, maybe this isn't the place for me. And he went to work in video games.
You know what's terrifying about that, that story you just told, is that so much, if not all, of coverage is being dumped over to AI. AI is not going to be passionate about any of it to say, we have to make this.
Well, look, in the same way that you couldn't rely on just coverage, you can't rely on just a tool, you know, and I know, look, we have a lot of conversations about that, but ultimately art, if I'm going to be lofty about it, is about human connection. Mm-hmm. And weirdly, we ended up not producing it, but Mike made it, and it was not successful. Andrew Nichols' follow-up to Gattaca was this movie called Simone, which was Sim 1, and it was about a simulated actor, and it was made a really long time ago. And it was because he was really frustrated because we were trying to package another movie, and he was waiting and waiting and waiting on these movie stars that meant his movie would get made or not. You're not going to make that connection to something that's not human. I think that the reason musicians like Joni Mitchell or Bob Dylan continue to resonate, or Bob Marley, with people no matter how old they are, is because you can feel the humanity and passion and lived life and connection. And that's something we deeply crave. Yeah. Even though we connect in different ways, the reason concerts have continued. And if we could look at making the film going experience special, and I don't mean like, you know, water being misted in your face, but that might be fun for something. Mm-hmm. But to make it fun and communal, that connection is what people always crave, that we crave as, you know, primates, right? Yeah.
Well, I always like to end. Thank you so much for your time. This has been amazing, as always. I
want to thank you, Todd, for bringing me into Producers United. Oh. And because of you, I got motion picture health insurance for the first time in my very long career when I was making Heretic. I didn't know it was possible to do. So if it wasn't for you, and then the growth into Producers United, fighting for the generation behind us. Yeah. How are they going to survive, and how do we continue? It's all about paying it forward. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. That's kind of you to say. I always like to end with this, because this is about human connection and is about experience. Best memory on set.
It's so hard. There's so many good ones.
And you have so many good ones.
There's so many good ones.
What was the first one that came to mind?
Well, the first one that always comes to mind is The Stupidest.
That's great.
It's so stupid. It's Georgia Cacondes, who's the greatest line producer I've ever worked with, and the best person. And she took over Hateful Eight for us and saved our butt when we didn't get snow. We were making Gattaca, and we didn't have a lot of money. Gary Martin, then the late legendary head of physical production at Columbia, told us that we couldn't afford a wave machine. And so he said, if you put a forklift into an Olympic-sized pool, you can make waves. So we're in this outdoor pool, and the forklift goes in, and it's this big scene with Ethan Hawke saying, I never saved anything for the way back, that whole like dramatic scene, which people have now seen because they show it in science class. And it doesn't work. And so Georgia and I are lying on our stomachs with kickboards, making waves through the whole entire scene. So to me, that's what producing is.
Yes.
It's being there to make waves when the way that you were told to do it doesn't work, and solving it.
I love it.
So
I love it.
That's always the weird one.
I have to watch that scene again now, just knowing that you're on your stomach with a kickboard off camera. It makes me love it even more.
We also got shut down for anybody who ever shoots at Leo Carrillo Beach. It is a non-nude beach, and they were going into the water naked for the exterior shot, and the cops started to shut us down. And our on-set costumer made G-strings for the guys with monofilament thread from the grips to keep us shooting. That was our solution for that. So it's like it's a look. We get to do something that's really fun, and aren't we lucky to do what we do? And that's why you should be passionate, because if it were widget work, everybody would make more money and have more security. We do it because it's magical.
Yeah. Well, even widget work is being replaced by AI and by computers right now. So nothing is safe. So the creative piece of it, if you're talented, is the safest place to be. Thank you, Stacey. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for bringing the podcast back. We need you.
Thanks for tuning in for this episode of The Producer's Guide. If you're a fan of this podcast, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends and family. And if you got any questions about producing, send me a DM on X at Todd_Garner. I want to thank my producer, Steve Delamater. And until next week, I'm Todd Garner. See you then.